Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Queen Olympia de Epirus, killed by her own daughter? Discover the truth after this crime that shook the Hellenistic world. I will tell you all the details of his tragic death. Subscribe and activate the bell so as not to miss anything. Imagine Olympia, a powerful woman, born in the royalty of Epirus. Her life was marked from the beginning by power and intrigue, an existence that saw her ascend to the top, but also rush into an unimaginable tragedy. Daughter of Neoptolemo I, king of Epirus, inherited an ambition and a determination that would define her forever. His beauty was legendary, capable of captivating the most powerful men of their time, but also to awaken their jealousy and anger. Her marriage to Pyrrho, king of Epirus, placed her at the center of political power. But his ambition was not limited to the simple ostentation of his position. Olympia was a strategist, a woman who played with the pieces of the political board with a mastery that few could match. Its influence extended beyond the court, weaving alliances and forging enmity with the same ease. But the destination, relentless, had a loud fall reserved. Life in court, with its palatial intrigues and its struggles for power, became a dangerous terrain. Olympia, accustomed to victory, faced powerful enemies and betrayals that led her to the edge of the abyss. His reign, which began with such promise, was obscured by the shadow of violence and murder. But before immersing ourselves in the tragedy of Olympia, we must understand the stage. Epirus. Imagine a mountainous kingdom, an aggregate and strategic territory located in the northwest of Greece, a place where the warriors crossed with merchants and where the Adriatic Sea was with the powerful kingdoms of Macedonia and the vast Hellenistic world. For you, understanding Epirus is key to understanding Olympia's power and fragility. Epirus was a crossroads, a bridge between the Greek world and the cultures of the East, a place where ideas, goods and wars were intertwined. Think of the commercial routes that crossed their mountains, carrying wealth and news from the East to the heart of Greece. This constant flow of people and merchandise molded the culture of Epirus, creating a complex and rich society in contrasts. Its geographical position also made it a battlefield. The armies of Macedonia, Rome, and other powers disputed their control, leaving an indelible mark on their history. There were years of conflicts, alliances, and betrayals that defined the fate of their kings and queens, including, of course, Olympias. Remember, his life developed in a melting pot of power and violence, a reflection of the time. Well, in that rugged Epirus, Neoptolemo I, Olympia's father, forged his way to power. Imagine an ambitious, cunning man, a leader who knew how to take advantage of the opportunities given by a kingdom in constant struggle for survival. His ascent was not easy. It was a dangerous climb through the mountains of power, full of strategic alliances and, of course, of enemies willing to see him fall. His reign was characterized by territorial expansion, consolidating the power of Epirus through skilled political maneuvers and, when necessary, with the strength of his armies. Think of battles in mountainous battlefields, in the roar of weapons, in the clash of swords and shields. A leader capable of joining the different Epirus tribes under their flag, something that was not an easy task in those times. But his reign was not exempt from internal conflicts. The complex geography of Epirus, with its different tribes and its changing loyalties, was a constant challenge for Neoptolemo. He had to navigate a sea of political intrigues, unstable betrayals and alliances, always with his eye on his enemies, and in the fragile stability of his kingdom, a game of constant power, a struggle for survival in a scenario of beauty and danger. And so, in the midst of intrigues and consolidation of the power of Neoptolemo, Olympia was born. Imagine a little girl with dark and penetrating eyes, growing in the bustling royal palace of Epirus, a world of men, where politics was a brutal game and women, often, pieces on the board. But Olympia was not just any piece. Since childhood, he demonstrated an unusual will and intelligence. His education was rigorous, away from the delicacies of the princesses of other kingdoms. He was taught military strategy, history, rhetoric, skills that were normally reserved for men. You can imagine it by studying old maps, listening to battle stories, and learning to manipulate words with the same precision as a craftsman handles a chisel. Prosody? Speak? Speak? Prosody rate equals 90%. In that masculine environment, Olympia learned to be strong, to impose his will, to navigate between the complexities of power. He was not allowed weakness. He was a princess, yes, but in a world that demanded more than delicacy. He demanded cunning, courage, and a strong determination to survive and, when the time came, to reign. The seed of his future, as tragic as imposing, was already sown. But Olympia's childhood was not just games and laughs from an early age. It was instructed in the arts of politics and war. Imagine a girl watching carefully the meetings of her father's advisors, absorbing every word, every gesture, every subtle movement of power. He learned to read facial expressions, to interpret silence, to decipher the true intentions after the carefully chosen words. That girl was being molded to govern. Beyond politics, Olympia received rigorous military education. Not only did he learn strategy and tactics, but also trained physically, dominating weapons management, riding, and martial arts. Visualize yourself witnessing your exercises. The precision of your javelin releases, your skill in the fight with the sword, its firmness about the galloping horse. He was a warrior princess in training. His education was not limited to practice. He also studied history, philosophy, and rhetoric. He learned to speak with eloquence, persuade, and negotiate. Imagine studying in a library full of ancient scrolls, absorbing the knowledge of the great thinkers of the time. This integral formation would prepare it for the challenges that expected it, to navigate the complexities of power and the traps of the court. So, imagine, you are Olympia, a young princess educated in intrigue and strategy. Suddenly, your life takes an unexpected turn. The moment of your marriage is approaching, a marriage that you have not chosen, but that will determine the future of your family and, possibly, of your whole kingdom. Pyrrho, king of Epirus, a powerful and ambitious man awaits you, but also a recognized warrior. The union between you is a matter of state, a strategic alliance to ensure political and military stability. What do you feel when thinking about that uncertain future, marked by the demands of royalty and the need to be part of a complex network of alliances? Do you feel prepared for the challenge? The link with Pyrrho makes you queen, but also a key piece on a political playboard much larger than you never imagined. From that moment on, each of your actions will have high-range consequences, not only for your personal life, but for the destiny of the kingdoms involved. You are surrounded by directors, general, and courtesy, all with their own agendas and ambitions. You must learn to navigate in this complex world, full of conspiracies, betrayals, and changing alliances. Are you ready to assume the weight of the crown and the responsibilities that it entails? Your marriage to Pyrrho is not only a political union, but also the beginning of a new stage in your life, a stage marked by power, responsibility, but also by tensions and challenges inherent to such a high position. Despite the opulence and luxury that surround you, the loneliness of royalty can be overwhelming. How do you face the pressure of maintaining the balance between duty and personal life? How do you adapt to this new role, so different from the life you met before? It was not a romantic love, that was clear. For you, Olympia, it was a strategic alliance. Pyrrho, the king of Epirus, represented power, a formidable army, and the possibility of ensuring the future of your family. His kingdom, although small, was strategic, a key piece on the political board of the time. Your marriage to him was a master play, a risky but necessary bet. Marriage gave you access to resources and military power, something crucial for your ambition and to protect your interests in the complex world of Greek politics. Pyrrho, on the other hand, saw in you the opportunity to consolidate his power and extend his influence. It was not a fairy tale, but a cold transaction, a pact sealed with the blood of political alliances and the desire for dominance. You imagined the future, a solid alliance, capable of resisting the onslaught of your enemies. But what would happen if Pyrrho's ambition or yours, so strong, collided? Could a marriage based on pragmatism and strategy survive the pressures and betrayals of the court? Your destiny, like Pyrrho, was linked to this dangerous game. The throne, power, survival, everything depended on this marriage. But that political union had a crucial objective: an heir. And so, after the marriage, the long-awaited moment arrived. Olympia gave birth to Alejandro II, a child who represented the hope of a united and powerful dynasty. His birth was an event held with great pomp in the kingdom of Epirus, a sign of the consolidation of the power of Olympia and Pyrrho. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. For you, this little heir was more than a child. It was the key piece in your intricate power game. A legitimate heir to the Epirus throne. The child guaranteed the continuity of the alliance and the perpetuation of the legacy of Pyrrho. His survival was essential, vital for your ambitions. But the birth of Alejandro too not only meant political stability, it also represented a challenge. Your position as queen, already precarious by the nature of your relationship with Pyrrho, became even more vulnerable. You had to protect your child, not only from external threats, but also from the possible intrigues of the court. But Olympia did not settle for the simple role of queen. His ambition overflowed the limits of the court. She longed for real power, not just the title he saw in his son, Alejandro, the perfect tool to achieve his goals, a manipulated king at will, a puppet in his skillful hands. For her, the throne was not a symbol of status, but an instrument to control Epirus' destination, and perhaps much further. His influence in court was evident. You will realize how her advice, often disguised as maternal concern, molded her husband's decisions, the Neoptolemo king. She wove a network of alliances and conspiracies, always seeking to strengthen her position and that of her son. Even if that meant betraying her own allies, politics was her game, and she, the most cunning player. Olympia dreamed with an empire for his son, a kingdom that extended beyond the Epirus borders. She saw not only a king in Alejandro, but a conqueror, a leader who would inherit her ambition and her implacable search for power. To achieve that dream, I was willing to anything, even violence and betrayal. Olympia's ambition was as great as his determination. That excessive ambition of Olympia faced her powerful Epirus families. You can imagine the glances of the sidewalk, the whispers in the corridors of the palace, the secret alliances woven in the dark. Each noble, each general, each counselor saw in it a threat, a usurper that had appropriated the throne by force and cunning. The rivalries between the great noble houses were as old as the kingdom itself. You will understand that these families, with their extensive networks of influence and their changing loyalties, saw Olympia's intrusion in their affairs. She, an outsider, had arrived to snatch the power and prestige they had enjoyed during generations. The conspiracies were woven in the shadows. They talked about secret alliances with neighboring kingdoms, plans to overthrow Olympia and restore the old order. Each encounter in the palace, each seemingly innocent conversation could hide a betrayal, a plot to end the queen and her reign. The atmosphere was loaded with tension, fear, and the certainty that the blood would spill soon. But who exactly yearned for their fall? Imagine the noble occasions, powerful clans with centuries of tradition, seeing how a woman, an outsider, rose in power. His privileges, his lands, his influences, everything was threatened by the relentless ambition of Olympia. They saw in it a usurpation, an affront to their legacy. Then there were their own relatives, those who saw in it a rival, a threat to their own ascent. Cousins, uncles, brothers, all with their own ambitions and willing to use any means to achieve power. For them, the elimination of Olympia was a necessity, a step on his way to the top. And we cannot forget those who had been victims of their relentless ambition. The political enemies, the defeated rivals, those whose families had been dispossessed or humiliated by their mandate. They all kept resentment, yearned for revenge, and patiently waited for the right time to act. For them, Olympia's death was not only a desire, but a need for justice. Remember Demetrio Poliorcetes, the ambitious king of Macedonia. At first, it seemed a valuable ally for Olympia, a powerful shield against his enemies. But his help came with a price. His influence grew with each military victory that he obtained in the name of Olympia, and his counselors were increasingly approaching the royal court, whispering in the queen's ear. His army, initially a reinforcement, became a constant presence in Epirus. Macedonian soldiers, with their iron discipline and arrogance, walked through the streets, imposing their will. The growing dependence of Olympia to Demetrio made her a puppet in her skillful hands. The noble occasions, already resentful of their government, saw the Macedonia influence with growing fear. Demetrio not only controlled the army, but also political resources and decisions, leaving Olympia relegated to a decorative figure. His ambition overflowed, and he approached the throne dangerously. Prosody. Speak. The prosody rate equals 90%. The situation became increasingly tense. The queen, in her blindness, did not perceive the danger that her ally represented. Blinded by the need for power and the false security provided by Demetrio, he was inexorably approaching his own downfall. Can you imagine the tension in the court? the fear that was breathed in every corner of the palace? Demetrio's influence became increasingly evident, and with her, the problems for Pyrrho. Remember that Demetrio was not only an ally, but an ambitious king with his own agendas. His advice, although apparently beneficial in the short term, led Pyrrho to unnecessary conflicts and expensive military campaigns. You will see how Demetrio's ambition began to undermine the stability of the kingdom. The first great defeat came in the battle against the Romans. You could see in previous chapters his arrogance and courage, but this time the Roman strategy, much more sophisticated than he expected, beat him. The battle was bloody and expensive, with Pyrrho losing a large part of his army and suffering a defeat that marked a turning point in his reign. But Roman defeat was not the only one. Subsequently, he faced new threats in southern Italy, where his expansionist ambitions collided with the interests of other powers. These new wars, exhausting and prolonged, further decimated their resources and their army. Each lost battle eroded his authority and weakened his kingdom. The news of Pyrrho's death in the battle against the Romans came to you like a blow. His death, an unexpected sake, changed the game board radically. From one moment to another, the solid alliance that had kept you in power was staggering, leaving your vulnerable kingdom and you exposed. Demetrio's influence, formerly contained by your father's firm hand, now expanded without control. Their ambitions, until then subtle, became an open threat, a danger that hunched on your crown and your life. You were alone, without the protection of the king and surrounded by hidden enemies. Pyrrho's death not only meant the loss of a powerful ally, but also the collapse of your support system. The nobles, previously loyal to your father, now doubted, looking for new leaders to swear fidelity. Your position became more and more precarious, a castle of cards about to crumble before the slightest breeze. After the death of Pyrrho, his son Alejandro II, just a teenager, inherited the Epirus throne. Imagine the scene. A young man, inexperienced in the art of war and politics, suddenly, in charge of a kingdom at war. The weight of the crown, too heavy for his still young shoulders, fell on him. His mother, Olympia, a powerful and ambitious woman, became his regent. Olympia, widow of King Pyrrho, was not a passive figure. She was a woman with a strong personality, accustomed to maneuvering in the intricate policy of the time. His influence on his son, although sometimes controversial, was undeniable. She was her counselor, her guide, and in many cases, the true force behind the throne. Under his mother's tutelage, Alejandro too learned government complexities, although his youth and lack of experience limited his decisions. Olympia handled most of the affairs of the kingdom, while the young king learned to deal with the pressures of the court and external threats. It was forced learning, in the middle of a turbulent era. But Alejandro was just a child, and the weight of the kingdom fell on Olympia's shoulders, his mother. She, a strong and ambitious woman, became the regent, governing in her son's name. Imagine the scene: Olympia, with his penetrating gaze, directing state affairs, surrounded by directors and generals, many of them distrustful of his power. Olympia, skilled strategist, dedicated himself to consolidating his power. Not only had to govern a kingdom, but also navigate the treacherous waters of the Epirota policy, full of intrigues and ambitions. Do you imagine the pressure of maintaining control while facing the opposition of powerful nobles who longed for the throne for themselves? His government, although initially successful, was marked by cruelty and ruthless elimination of his enemies. Many nobles who opposed their reign mysteriously disappeared, or were executed after unclear accusations. The shadow of violence and intrigue hovered over the kingdom. Despite the difficulties, Olympia managed to maintain relative stability in Epirus during the regency years. His strong will and his astute political allowed him to overcome threats to his power, at least for a while. But the seed of discord was already sown, and the consequences of its actions would manifest in a terribly unexpected way. Prosody, speak. Speak, the prosody rate equals 90%. But peace in the kingdom was ephemeral. Demetrio Poliorcetes, a powerful and ambitious general, became a growing threat to Olympia. His influence in the Macedonia court was increasing, and his actions, increasingly bold, openly challenged the authority of the regent. You can imagine the tension in the air, palpable as a storm about to explode. Olympia, accustomed to absolute power, saw in Demetrio a threat not only to his position, but also to the security of his son, Alejandro. His fears were justified. Demetrio, with his excessive ambitions, was in secret, looking for a way to consolidate his power and perhaps even snatch the throne from a young Alexander even without experience in politics. The conflict between them was not limited to simple political disagreements. There was a deep personal distrust. Olympia, with his impetuous character and his history of cruelty, saw in Demetrio a threat to the stability of the kingdom, while Demetrio, meanwhile, saw in Olympia an obstacle to his ambitions. The tension between the two was a fuse about to turn on a civil war. His growing power worried Olympia. You saw how Demetrio wove a network of secret alliances, bribing directors and generals to weaken your position. The loyalty of the court staggered, with conspiracy whispers replacing open conversations. You knew that Demetrio longed for the throne, and his ambition did not know limits. The conspiracy was slowly brewing, like a snake curling in the heart of the kingdom. Demetrio, with a mastery in political manipulation, was sowing discord, using the information he obtained from your own directors to undermine your authority. You felt increasingly isolated, surrounded by enemies disguised as friends. The betrayal came unexpectedly. A close counselor, whom you thought loyal, revealed your plans and movements to Demetrio. This act of betrayal caused a sudden change in the balance of power, giving Demetrio the advantage he needed to carry out his plan. Your own court had become a snake nest, ready to give you the final lunge. The tension in the palace was palpable. You saw how conspiracy whispers became direct threats. Anonymous messages, full of evening but scary warnings, reached your desk. Some talked about poisoning, others from an attack during a public ceremony. Fear, a cold snake, slipped through the veins of your kingdom. Demetrio, with his growing influence, was the central figure in all suspicions. Although there were no direct evidence, its ambition was a double-edged sword, a sword that hung on your head. Each encounter with him became a deadly game of looks and silences, where a poorly pronounced word could be your death sentence. Your bodyguards, formerly loyal, now seemed distracted, their hesitant looks, their slow and clumsy movements. Loyalty had become a luxury that you could no longer afford. Each shadow in the palace seemed to hide an enemy, every whisper a plot to end your reign, with your life itself. Paranoia consumed you. Then the accusation arrived. They accused you of poisoning you, Olympia, the powerful queen. The death of a nobleman, an enemy perhaps, but an enemy who now pointed to you with his finger from the grave. The rumors, before a whisper, were now a thunder rumbling in everyone's ears. Have you ordered the murder? Have you used a subtle poison to silence your detractors? The court was divided. Some saw you as a victim of a conspiracy, a powerful woman threatened by those who craved your fall. Others, blinded by fear or ambition, pointed you out as a ruthless murderer, capable of any atrocity to maintain power. The tests were scarce, the circumstantial evidence. Who had betrayed you? Who had warmed this plot against you? The poison, they say, was imperceptible, silent, a slow and subtle death, without leaving apparent trace. But you, are you capable of such cruelty? Or were you really the dam of a ruthless hunt? The truth was hidden after a layer of intrigues, lies and ambitions. A veil that darkened the road to justice. Your destiny hung from a thread, as fragile as life itself. The trial began, a grotesque show. They sat you in an improvised court, surrounded by enemies who murmured accusations. There were no lawyers to defend you, only the cold look of the judges, men bought by your adversaries. False witnesses were presented, their testimonies full of lies and exaggerations, stories that painted a dark and perverse image of you. You felt the pressure, the atmosphere full of palpable hate. The tests were weak, manipulated with obvious malice. You were accused of rumors, on palace gossip, in the word of those who hated you. There was no opportunity to refute the accusations, nor to present your own defense. The process was rigged from the beginning, a farce designed to condemn you regardless of the truth. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. The injustice was flagrant. You, the queen, were judged not by law, but by the whim of your enemies. His lies became irrefutable truth in that corrupt court. The manipulation was evident, each witness, each test, carefully orchestrated to ensure your conviction. Destiny was already written, sealed by ambition and hate. The silence fell on the room after reading the sentence, death. The word resonated in your ears, cold and definitive. There were no supplications that could change the course of justice, or rather, of the injustice that hidden over you. The look of the judges, impassive, judged you without mercy. You felt the pressure of the crowd, a mixture of hate and curiosity that wrapped you like a shroud. They took you to a cold and humid cell, where the darkness hidden, time stretched, every second became an eternity. You thought of your life, in the victories, in the defeats, in the betrayal of your own daughter. The bitterness mixed with fear, a deadly cocktail that corroded you inside. You knew that your days were counted, that death was approaching. The day of your execution came with dawn. They led you to the place of torture, surrounded by soldiers. There was no opportunity to repent or farewell. Only the cold steel of the sword, ready to end your reign, to your life, to your suffering. Death approached, relentless and definitive. But the sentence did not surprise you alone. Deidamia, Olympia's daughter, watched from the shadows, her inexpressive face. A stone mask that hid her true intentions. Was she the true instigator? Or a simple piece in a much bigger game? His silence, as deep as the one that had fallen in the room, was even more disturbing than the clamor of the accusers. The evidence, although circumstantial, pointed to a conspiracy. Deidamia, young and ambitious, had benefited from the fall of his mother. The rise to power, the control of wealth, would these sufficient incentives be to orchestrate the death of the woman who gave her life? The question resonated in your mind, a corrosive doubt that refused to dissipate. Some rumors suggested that Deidamia had manipulated the evidence, sowing discord between her mother and her enemies. Others talked about a secret pact, an agreement with those who yearned for the end of Olympia's reign. You wonder, was a victim of the circumstances or a cold and calculator of the tragedy that had unleashed? The answer, like most of the mysteries of the past, remains in the gloom. But what did that stone mask hid? The answer came with the cold light of the dawn. You imagine the scene. Olympia, tied, with the look at a distant point, perhaps remembering a glorious past, perhaps imagining a future that would never come. His face, although impassive, reflected the imminent tragedy. The executioner, with his shining sword under the sun, waited for the signal. Deidamia, impassive, gave the order. A subtle gesture, barely noticeable, but sealed the fate of his mother. The silence broke alone with the sound of metal cutting the air, an acute and brutal sound that resonated in the patio, a barely audible shout, cut by the edge of the sword. Olympia's head rolled, separating from the body with a deaf sound. The blood sprouted, staining the cold stone of the patio. At a cruel and definitive end for a powerful queen, executed by her own daughter. The scene, brutal in its simplicity, remained recorded in the memory of all present, a macabre testimony of the power and cruelty of the Hellenistic world. Olympia's death left a void in Epirus. Imagine the stir. Your allies, before powerful, now they looked vulnerable. His influence, which extended throughout the kingdom, began to crumble. The palatial intrigues, previously subtle, became open and ruthless. The political stability, which she had maintained with a firm hand, staggered. The rival features, which previously remained at bay for the fear of Olympia, now fought for control. Think about chaos. Alliances that break, betrayals, small-scale civil wars. The kingdom, previously united under his government, was divided into small kingdoms at war. The rich culture of Epirus, formerly flourishing, began to suffer. The consequences for the population were devastating. The economy, formerly, collapsed. Commerce declined, agriculture suffered, and common people suffered hunger and misery. Olympia's legacy, a powerful and controversial queen, became a sad memory of a time of stability that was lost forever. His death marked the principle of a long and dark was for Epirus. But Olympia's death did not mean the end of Epirus. His daughter, Deidamia, a determined and ambitious woman, took the reins of the kingdom. Imagine the pressure. Young, surrounded by powerful and rivals advisors who sought to take advantage of the situation. Deidamia had to prove his worth, and fast. Prosody, speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. His reign was a constant challenge. He had to deal with the rival factions that struggled for power, consolidate his authority, and maintain the stability of the kingdom. It was not easy, but Deidamia showed surprising political intelligence for a woman of her age at that time. Despite the difficulties, Data Maya managed to maintain internal peace for a considerable time. He implemented administrative reforms, strengthened the army, and secured the borders of the kingdom. His leadership, initially questioned, began to gain respect, even admiration. But what was left of Olympia after his death? His reign, although brief and marked by the tragedy, left an indelible mark on the history of Epirus. Imagine the historians of the time, trying to understand the magnitude of their fall, how such a powerful queen could be the victim of her own daughter. Its history became a warning, an example of the complexities of power and the fragility of life. Although the violence of his death eclipsed many of his achievements, his figure remained in collective memory. There was talk of his courage, his political cunning, of his ability to maintain balance in an unstable kingdom. Think about how its generation legend to generation was transmitted, through stories told in a low voice, in the light of the candles. Olympia's murder became a symbol of the danger inherent in absolute power. Its history serves as a reminder that even the most imposing figures can be overthrown, and that the legacy of a ruler can be marked by both their triumphs and its tragic disappearance. What do you think? How do you think Olympia is remembered today, centuries after his death? Imagine historians scrutinizing yellowish scrolls, looking for clues about Olympia's life. What sources do we have? Mainly, stories of later authors such as Plutarch, who collected stories and legends sometimes contradictory. He tells you about a powerful, ambitious, but also cruel woman. How much of what he wrote is objective and how much is interpretation or even amplified rumor over time? Olympia's death, that atrocious crime at the hands of her own daughter, is wrapped in a veil of mystery. The sources do not match the details. Was it a cold and calculated execution, or an impulsive act in the middle of a power struggle? Each story offers a slightly different version, leaving the reader with more questions than answers. You wonder, how to separate the truth from fiction in this historical puzzle? Remember that the story, especially the old one, is built from scattered fragments, of biased testimonies, of subjective interpretations. Analyzing sources requires a critical eye, a capacity to detect possible biases and contradictions. IT is a detective work, where you have to rebuild the last piece by piece, without letting yourself be carried away by the emotion of a dramatic narrative. Look for evidence, analyze inconsistencies, questions the stories. But who really was Olympia? The sources, as always, offer us contradictory perspectives. For some, it was a powerful and cunning queen, a key figure in the policy of her time. A woman who, despite conventions, knew how to weave alliances and defend her son, Alexander the Great. You imagine a young, ambitious Olympia, surrounded by courtiers and strategists, plotting their movements on the political board of the Hellenistic world. However, others paint her as a cruel, ruthless woman, even poisoning. There is talk of palatial intrigues, murders and revenge. An Olympia obsessed with power, willing to everything in order to ensure the future of his son. Can you imagine that Olympia, with his eyes full of a cold determination, making decisions that would seal the fate of many? The truth, as is usually the case, is probably at some intermediate point. The image that comes to us from Olympia is that of a complex woman, molded by the circumstances of a turbulent era. A queen who, whatever your final opinion, left an indelible mark on history. Do you think the story has been fair to her, or has been a victim of the prejudices of those who judged her centuries later? But how does Olympia compare with other powerful women of antiquity? Unlike figures such as Cleopatra, which project an image of seductive and cunning manipulative, Olympia is presented as a more violent and direct figure in his search for power. While Cleopatra used her charm to weave alliances, Olympia did not hesitate to resort to intrigue and, finally, to the murder to ensure her position and that of her son. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. If we compare it with women like Lysandra, the Espartana, we see a difference in their methods. Lysandra, although also politically active, was handled with greater subtlety and diplomacy. While Lysandra sought to consolidate her power through astute political strategies, Olympia turned to the physical elimination of her opponents. These are two radically different approaches to achieve power. Even comparing it with other queens that committed violent acts, Olympia's brutality stands out. While other powerful women resorted to the elimination of political rivals through palatial intrigues or more discreet poisonings, the decapitation of their own daughter represents an act of extreme violence, which places it in a unique place, and perhaps sinister, in the history of women in power in ancient times. Unlike Cleopatra, whose influence was based on charm and diplomacy, Olympia exercised power more directly in the Hellenistic world. The women of royalty, although with limitations, could play an important role in politics. Imagine the complex network of alliances and rivalries between kingdoms, where a queen could be the key piece in the stability or collapse of an empire. His influence extended through marriage, the education of his children, and, in some cases, direct political decision-making. Think of the palatial intrigues, the conspiracies and the struggles for the power that were developed behind the doors of the palaces. Olympia, like many other women of his time, was not exempt from these struggles. His ability to navigate this dangerous political world was crucial for his rise and, paradoxically, also for his fall. That it was not a simple decorative figure. She was a key player, although the rules of the game were designed to limit her power. Although the direct participation of women in formal policy was limited, their indirect influence was undeniable. Through their role as mothers, wives, or confidants of the rulers, they could influence state decisions. The education of their children, the management of diplomatic relations, and the administration of the kingdom's resources were areas where they could exercise their power significantly, often from the shadows. In this context, Olympia was no exception, although her ambition led her beyond the accepted limits. Imagine the Epirus of the 3rd century BC, a mountainous and relatively isolated kingdom in the northwest of Greece. Unlike the powerful cities stood like Athens or Sparta, the Epirus was a less urbanized territory, with an economy based on agriculture and livestock. Its political structure was less defined than that of its neighbors, with a complex network of tribes and city-states with a fluctuating loyalty to the central rulers. The influence of foreign powers, such as the Kingdom of Macedonia, was constant. The Epirus was often involved in regional conflicts, sometimes as an ally, sometimes as an enemy of the ambitious Macedonic dynasties. This political instability directly influenced the life of royalty, including Olympia itself, who had to navigate an intricate network of alliances and betrayals to maintain its power. Remember that the rivalries between noble families and the struggles for the control of the territory were frequent. Olympia herself, despite her power, was not free of these tensions. His position as queen depended on his ability to maintain control of rival factions, and the weakness in his reign could cause a crisis of succession with lethal consequences, as we will see in his history. But let's go back to Olympia. Despite the relative isolation of the Epirus, the Greek culture permeated his life. Imagine a young Olympia, surrounded by the myths and legends of the Olympic gods, learning to read and write in ancient Greek, a language that resonated with Homer's greatness and the wisdom of philosophers. His education, although perhaps less formal than that of a young Athenian, reflects the dominant cultural influence. Greek music, with its rhythms and melodies, was surely part of their daily lives. Think about flutes and liras accompanying family celebrations, religious holidays, or even the simple act of knitting in the workshop. Epic poetry, telling stories of heroes and goddesses, would have reached him through rhapsodas or recited in social meetings. Greek sculpture and architecture, although perhaps not on the same scale as in large cities, also left their mark in the temples dedicated to the Greek gods, in the decorations of the houses of the nobility, even in the simple ceramic vessels. There were vestiges of that classic art. Olympia, like any other woman in her class, would have been surrounded by these artistic manifestations, absorbing her beauty and meaning. Prosody. Speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Olympia's death, as violent as unexpected, left a void of power in the Epirus. Think about the immediate impact. Political instability seized the region. His murder, such a brutal act, sowed discord between the different factions, eager to take control after the fall of his queen. The struggles for succession were fierce. Imagine the ambition unleashed, the forged and broken alliances, the betrayals and conspiracies that had to weave in court. The stability of the kingdom, already fragile, collapsed under the weight of violence and uncertainty. Olympia's murder not only triggered a succession crisis, but considerably weakened the Epirus on the geopolitical stage. His enemies, formerly cautious, took advantage of the situation to expand their influence. The power void attracted ambitious neighbors, anxious to conquer territories. Olympia's legacy, truncated so brutally, left a deep brand in the history of the Epirus. His death became a symbol of the fragility of power and the devastating consequences of excessive ambition. The political instability that followed his murder marked the fate of the kingdom for years. But what do modern historians say about this brutal murder? Many point to a struggle for power. Think about the situation. Olympia was a powerful queen with ambitions and enemies. His death was not a simple act of violence, but a carefully planned political blow. Theories abound, but most agree that ambition and lack of political stability in the Epirus played a key role. Some historians even suggest that Olympia's own daughter, Deidamia, could have been manipulated by others to carry out the crime. Imagine the pressure, weight of ambition and palatial intrigue. Maybe she was a piece in a game much larger than herself, a tool used by rival factions to eliminate a figure too powerful. The lack of direct contemporary sources hinders the task of determining with certainty who was involved and what were the exact motivations. What we do know is that Olympia's murder had devastating consequences for the Epirus, plunging the region in a period of instability and violence. Today, Olympia's story serves as a reminder of the struggles for power and intrigues that marked the Hellenistic era. But who really ordered Olympia's death? Historical evidence is fragmentary, leaving space for many interpretations. Was it only Deidamia, his daughter, driven by an excessive ambition? Or were others involved, perhaps court characters with their own hidden agendas? Remember that power in the Hellenistic world was a dangerous game, full of unstable alliances and implacable betrayals. The answer, unfortunately, remains wrapped in the mystery. And what about the exact reason? The struggle for power is a plausible explanation, but were there other factors? Any personal resentment between mother and daughter? Perhaps a broader conspiracy, a palatial plot that involved other members of the royal family or influential noble? Try to imagine the climate of intrigues and tensions that should have existed in court, where ambition and survival were played daily. Finally, how did the murder take place? The details are scarce, but the brutality of the act suggests careful planning. Was it a direct attack, an elaborate plot, or a formal execution? Did real guards participate or only people close to Deidamia? Try to mentally rebuild the crime scene, based on historical data and your own intuition. The answers to these questions could shed light on the true motivations of the murderers. So, what can we really conclude about Olympia's death? The truth, friend, is that it remains wrapped in a veil of mystery. Historical sources are contradictory, incomplete, and often biased by the perspectives of the victors. Each story adds one more piece to the puzzle, but the complete picture continues to avoid that we may never know with absolute certainty who was responsible, or if it was a more complex conspiracy of what we imagine. What we do know is that Olympia's life and death were extraordinary. His ascent to power, his reign, and his tragic fall leave us with more questions than answers. The mystery that surrounds his murder has fascinated historians and fans for centuries, and will probably continue to do so for many more. It is a reminder of how little we really know about the past, even about such important figures as her. Olympia's story is a lesson of humility. It reminds us that power, even in its most absolute form, is ephemeral, and that the actions of the powerful, even centuries later, continue to resonate over time. Its history invites us to question the dominant narratives, to seek the truth in the shadows, and to understand that the story is often incomplete and open to multiple interpretations. Olympia's death is still an enigma, a mystery that, perhaps, will always remain unsolved. /prosody /speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. And now, we arrive at the part where I thank you for accompanying me on this trip through time and mystery surrounding Olympia. Your interest is what makes this type of research possible. Without your curiosity and your time, this video would simply exist. Thank you for being part of this community, for sharing the video, and for leaving your comments, which are always very enriching. I also want to express my most sincere gratitude to historians and academics whose works have been the basis of this research. His years of study and dedication have illuminated this dark chapter of history, allowing me to build this story for you. His publications, although sometimes contradictory, have been fundamental to understand the complexity of the life and death of Olympia. Last but not least, thanks to the team that has made possible the creation of this video. From the research and writing of the script to edition and post-production, each person has contributed their talent and dedication so you can enjoy this story. His hard work and passion are the reason why this video is in front of your eyes. To deepen the life of Olympia, I recommend you consult Plutarch's works, specifically their Parallel Lives, where you will find a detailed, although sometimes biased, biography. Remember that Plutarch wrote centuries after the events, so his story is influenced by the sources available at the time. It also seeks modern academic works that analyze primary sources and subsequent historical interpretations. Do not limit yourself to a single source. There are several theories about the murder of Olympia. Some point to a palatial conspiracy, others to his daughter's personal ambition. Investigate different points of view and analyze the evidence presented by each author. Remember that history is often interpreted differently according to the historian's perspective. Do not satisfy yourself with a single version of the facts. For a more complete vision, look for documentaries and videos that address the subject. Many history channels on YouTube offer valuable and visually attractive information. In addition, you can explore virtual museums and online databases with artifacts of the Hellenistic era. There is a world of information waiting for you to discover it. I hope you enjoyed this shocking story. If you liked it, give like and subscribe for more. What do you think about Olympia's fate? Leave it in the comments. /prosody/speak